Hi there. We have a guest on the channel, Sturla Ellingsvåg. He's actually doing research on Viking DNA, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in this video, and we're going to have some campfire coffee as well. But first of all, Sturla, can you just tell us what are your background?
Well, I'm a historian, not a geneticist, with a master's degree from many years ago in Norway. And I work now at a very famous DNA lab in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's very international, and I got a lot of exciting stuff coming out on Vikings also.
Now we're sitting in the smoke now.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Yeah, it's nice.
The way of the Vikings.
It's very nice indeed.
By the way, we will use the term Viking as the name for the Scandinavians, really, 1,000 years ago. You know, I know it's not all totally correct, but it's actually part of Norwegian language. We use the word Viking.
Yeah.
So it's very hard. It's very ingrained in our language. So you just have to tolerate that, okay?
It's fine by me.
Now, who were the Vikings?
So, who were the Vikings? It's really,
genetically.
Well, biologically, they were a combination of several tribes.
Where did they come from, the tribes?
Well, to put it simply, at the start of the Bronze Age, we had a massive migration into Europe, the Indo-Europeans, and to put it very plainly, they came in two different tribes, and mostly men, and they would establish control over all of Europe in a very short time. And when they came...
When was this?
The start of the Bronze Age, so 4,500 years ago, about. And we see what is staggering with this new DNA research is that the men who lived in these areas, like in Spain and Portugal, all of them disappeared. And on the British Isles...
So what happened to the men?
Well,
the native men there?
Well, we know there was plague. And we know that everything changed with the new arrivals, language, religion, also the clan society and the warrior culture. This is our roots, right? And also this class society order with a minority on top, an elite ruling through taxation. So we know this happened in a very short time, and there was some plague in this, so more research is being done as we speak. On the British Isles, 90% of all the men disappeared in a very short time, of the ones who were there before.
In which areas? Not all over the place?
All the British Isles.
All the British Isles?
Yes, but this is statistically, right, so in general. But not in Scandinavia and Northern Europe, present-day Germany. There seems to have been some kind of mix. So when you ask me what a Viking is, these three tribes, the farmers, also with a lot of hunter-gatherer elements from before, but they were much fewer, right, in before the Bronze Age. And then they would mix in a very strange sense, all these Central Asian invaders. And that's sort of what made, in a sense, what most Europeans are of.
Oh, I have some questions from the channel, from the viewers of the channel. And we're going to get straight to that. Quite a few very interesting questions, I would say. Is there a higher percentage of Neanderthal DNA in the Viking people?
You know, I got 4%. I did this test on 23andMe, and I'm in the top 91 percentile or something, so I'm very proud of that. You know, it's an interesting question. I would have to say it's too early to give a precise answer because we need more Neanderthal DNA. But every time there's more new genomes being publicly available for people, we see that the percentage is rising. And we know the Neanderthals were in Europe, right, for tens of thousands of years before, and we know they mated. In 2009, all the top scientists on Neanderthals, they said no, they didn't mate with Homo sapiens, but they did. In 2010 we found that out. So I would think so, but it's because it's plausible. Especially if you look on the hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
The first ones who came to Scandinavia, there were actually two tribes there, two small tribes. Some from the south, a little bit darker skin, blue eyes. But then you had those coming from the north, down along the Norwegian coastline. And they would mix. And they had the fair skin, probably the height. And my guess is that those are the ones...
I'm going to sort out the fire.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, my guess is that those are the ones who came down from the north, who had more Neanderthal DNA in them. So my guess is, but we need some more evidence on that, and research being done.
It's not my firewood. I'm going to replace it, by the way. I found it here. I don't trust it. No. Okay.
We'll have our coffee, right?
Yeah.
I have to say it's very nice to be here though. It's very quiet.
It's wonderful out here. Next question. How much Norse ancestry is present in America today? North America, I guess they mean North America.
So the question isn't on the European settlers, but 1,000 years ago, would you say?
How much Norse ancestry is present in America today? That's the question.
Well, among immigrants that came later, in present day, there would be many.
Know.
Yeah, I would say there are more Norwegians in the U.S. and Canada than in Norway today. So that's one way to look at the answer. But if the question is asked about what if the Norse from Greenland who came down to America, if they left some DNA trace there, I remember this haplogroup, DNA haplogroup called X, which you could find among Native Americans, but you couldn't find it further west in America, only on the east coast. Yes, please.
It's in it's not beard oil. It's in the box.
I'll try it. Thanks. Now, so a lot of researchers were curious on this special haplogroup because you couldn't find it towards Siberia and Asia and in that direction, but now we have. So that could have been one answer to the question, but it's not anymore.
Next question. Are there any obscure medical conditions or abnormalities or health issues associated with Viking DNA?
Well, yeah. I actually don't know what it's called, but there was this condition on bone problems among some Vikings. There you go, thanks. So we can actually find that out, and I remember I saw this paper a couple of years ago where they were able to see this genetical marker on people who had migrated out of Scandinavia. You can find it down in continental Europe and also among the Røde Vikings, but you can see this genetic disorder sort of which tend to follow among where Vikings settled. So yes. Okay. But there's more. We're going to know more soon also. Yeah.
And next question. Lots of mixing with quilts. He writes, what is the percentage of that in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden.
Yeah.
So the Celtic percentage in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. And I know it's very high in Faroe Islands and Iceland, he writes.
Yeah, it's very high there. There was this Icelandic paper 2 years ago that said in around the year 1050 there was I think 50% Celtic, especially among the women. But 200 years later, that was down to half because of selection, right? They would marry towards the elite, or the elite would have more children, which makes sense. But I think it's kind of weird if you look a little bit further back in time, earlier than the Bronze Age, these roots, you see a lot of Celtic DNA coming into Scandinavia, and it could be right before the Viking times, but it also could be in the Viking times. So when we look at the percentages, it's actually highest in Norway, where you have that farmer component. This tribe is the lowest in present-day Norway and highest in Sweden. So this can be interpreted in many ways. So we're actually not sure yet, but there is a considerable element, absolutely. And you can see all the redheads, the red beards you have in Norway, lots of it, especially in the mountains. So yeah, it's high, and I would say definitely some from the Viking age. Absolutely, yeah.
And another one. Do Dutch people have Viking blood?
Oh yeah, Dutch people have a lot of Viking blood, and people in Norway even don't know this fairly well. Before the huge America migrations out of Norway and Scandinavia, where 40%, more than 40%, close to 50 of Norwegians, 50% migrated to America, right? But before this time, during the Napoleonic era, the Danish king, he was king of Norway then also, he financed his wars with Norwegian timber. And you had villages of people who would go with the boats down to Rotterdam, and even in my family also in the 17th century, we have family members who left Norway to go to Holland. So the same amount of Huguenots who came from France to Holland also came from Norway to Holland. 10%, 80,000 people. So even today, 10% of the Dutch population is originally from Norway. And it's actually in the north where you have skating. Lots of good skaters from there. They have some Viking blood in them.
Do people in the Scandinavian countries have a direct relation to the Vikings of the past? If yes, at what percentage?
So a direct, so you mean the ancestral lines going back, the family tree, basically?
I don't know. I'm just reading out the questions there.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look on it, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and 8, 16, 32, it gets a lot of people, right? And we weren't that many people 700 years ago, for example. Unfortunately, because of Protestantism, almost all the church books were burned in the early 1500s. So we would have to be able to trace our family lines through some of the nobility, the old Norwegian nobility. And some of that nobility married into the new Danish nobility, which also was Viking, but not all of them. Many actually, and they didn't disappear, they went down into becoming farmers. So we can, absolutely, yeah, many lines. I have 7 or 8 lines in my family tradition going back to the Vikings. So it's possible to trace. But what I'm working on now is taking DNA from skeletons, Viking graves, especially the mounds, and it's those who have already been excavated. We'll take that DNA and we'll compare it to present day Scandinavians or people with Scandinavian heritage to compare.
Yeah. Okay. But it's interesting what you told me before we started recording about there being a sort of a political agenda in the universities. While the way I see it, when you do research, you shouldn't have opinions, you shouldn't have any political, well, you should keep the politics out of it because it's science. So what's that about? I've heard Jordan Peterson talking about that, but I didn't know it was like that in your field of research as well.
I think it's especially like that in my field, and I'm very, very happy. I feel fortunate that Jordan Peterson has spoken out like he has, like a year ago, for example, on these topics, because I've experienced it firsthand. When I did my master's many years ago, I wanted to write about Vikings who settled in Normandy, in France. And they wouldn't allow it. They said, no, that's Vikings, that's elitism.
What?
Elitism.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, that's Vikings, and that means it's elitism.
Vikings are elitism.
Yeah, elitist.
Doing research on the Vikings?
Yes, they wanted, it was more important to do research on poor people.
Poor people?
Yeah, it's a Marxist way of setting the agenda. So I've experienced that firsthand. I wanted to write about trade, and they said, no, that's capitalism. And then
Sorry?
That's capitalism, yes. The
Trade?
Trade is capital. And then
this is insanity.
And then I said, well, and I also want to write about DNA because I work with DNA. And they said, no, that's new research and that's irrelevant. So you can use an appendix in the end. And when I refused to do these three things, I wrote about Vikings, I wrote about trade, and I wrote about DNA. I experienced, a certain hostility in the sense that they wouldn't let me have even a good grade because they wouldn't want me to continue through the system in the academia. So I'm not in the academia in Norway because of this, because if you adapt, if you lick a professor up by his back, as you say, we say that in Norway, right? That's how you would say it in the US.
The video just got demonetized.
Oh, it does, huh? Do you think so?
I'll edit it out, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe.
We'll see. But if you have, if you only want those persons through the system, in the hierarchy of the academia at the universities, then those are the ones who are writing the history books. And it's a nice way to control the agenda of what young people are taught at schools. And of course they don't want a person like me who is considered an opponent, because I believe in reason and to be sound and honest. And now with all the new DNA research, that's actually evidence, actual evidence. Yeah, that's
actual
right?
evidence. That was what I was thinking. It's not an opinion. It's actual research. It's evidence.
So I see now with all since 2015, for the past 5 years, with all the new DNA evidence coming out, our history books needs to be rewritten, quite a lot actually.
Okay.
On Vikings, for example, and the question is, who's going to write those books, and what's it going to say?
Yeah.
Because I'm not allowed to write those books, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was put out of the system, right?
I see.
So I've experienced this, exactly what Jordan Peterson talks about, and I think it's sad. They've tried to ruin the reputation of Vikings for decades, but it doesn't work. Vikings just keep becoming more and more popular among people, and I think that's a good thing, because they were not all murderers and pillagers. I mean, if you look on Vikings, of course, when it comes to
again, we are talking, when we say Vikings as Norwegians, we're talking about our ancestors, both the farmers and the raiders. So for Americans, they have this distinction, which might be more correct, but we say Vikings for our ancestors.
Yeah.
That's just the way we talk. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you look on Vikings as traders, the Viking Age then didn't start in the year 793, because we know there was a lot of trade in the Baltic going eastward many decades before that. And trade, if you look on trade, we see no difference between the Viking Age and the period earlier. And this is an actual debate among historians and professors in Scandinavia at the moment. So hopefully things will start to change, and things have improved. Mind you, things have improved. It was horrible 15 years ago. We couldn't talk like this then.
Yeah, well, I've had to listen to people lecturing, saying the Viking Age started at the year so and so, and ended at the year so and so. You know, like the Lindisfarne and the Battle of Hastings. But it's very artificial the way I see it, because first of all, the people who lived in the Viking Age, they didn't think of themselves as living in the Viking Age, obviously. And so at the battle there, did they just decide, okay, this is now the Viking Age is over, and they all agreed on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess the church had something to do with it, and the rise of feudalism and the new, well, these countries in a sense, nations, I mean. But if you look on the clan culture at the start of the Viking Age, what we see now with DNA and archaeology combined, it really goes a long way back. So if you look on that, and not the pillaging and the wars, the Viking Age, I mean, if there's no similarity, you can't really talk about when it started, because this clan culture and the warrior society goes back into the Bronze Age, right?
The way I see it personally is that, you know, it's just I separate between before the Viking Age and after the Viking Age started, and to me, I define it as it started with the sail. When they got the sail, then it started. But now I'm reading that they probably had sails before we thought they had. And this will always be changing as we are digging up new stuff, and doing the DNA research and everything. So I do understand that, but it's also it's exciting and it's frustrating as well.
And I think it's all good, but we have to alter our minds, and I have to put on, for the past few years, new glasses to see things in larger perspectives. I've been in Central Asia to learn more about the roots of our warrior culture, and in the Caucasus Mountains, and I've been looking for Goths, Crimean Goths on Crimea. It's all so connected, and we're seeing it now with DNA. So it's very exciting. It's a very exciting time period, and in 5 years, there's so many exciting things going on. So I'm very eager and excited for the future, but we need to readjust and alter a little bit the way we think about Vikings. Yeah. Vikings won't disappear, that's for sure.
That's good to know. Well, thank you for taking the time to have this very interesting chat here by the campfire. I must apologize for the campfire. The worst campfire I've ever had, I believe, but we got our coffee.
Can I mention if people want to see more?
You have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, a small YouTube channel, but if people want
to
see...
Go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the video description.
It's called Viking Stories, so it's fairly easy to remember, but it's all about the Viking research and the Viking stories, but also a little bit about Viking mentality, I think. That's important to remember today. So yeah, if people want some of that Viking stories in addition to your content, sure.
Okay, then we always say, I try to remember to say skål.
Skål.
To the viewer. And cheers and skål. And I hope you enjoyed this chat. I'll see you in a few days, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for the chat.